Olá, bom dia. Bom dia a todos presentes aqui na CPM da Escola de Comunicação da Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro, UFRJ. É um prazer imenso poder abrir aqui a conferência da professora Marie Bakardjieva, falei certo? Não só pelo currículo da professora, que é um currículo muito interessante. Desculpa, acho que tem alguma coisa de microfone aqui. Tá tudo certo? Não só pelo currículo e pela experiência acadêmica da professora, acho que é muito importante para nós do Brasil recebermos pesquisadores que têm essa projeção internacional, como a Maria tem, e que trabalha com temas tão próximos a temas que são cada vez mais frequentes, e eu poderia dizer que são emergentes aqui no Brasil, no campo da comunicação, que vem se modificando. Acho que o campo da comunicação tinha uma característica diferente até um tempo atrás no Brasil, e a gente cada vez mais está caminhando para trabalhar temas que conversam com uma agenda global, e eu acho que isso é muito interessante. Eu acho que a vinda da professora aqui é mais um marco para isso, e mais uma troca que a gente pode ter, que vai incrementar nesse nosso caminho de cada vez mais dialogar com a comunidade internacional e poder fazer pesquisas acadêmicas não só relevantes de impacto social, mas que dialoguem com essa comunidade. Então, eu acho que é muito interessante trazer esse tema que vai ser discutido hoje sobre o populismo e os impactos desse populismo e a relação disso com o campo da comunicação. É um tema que eu não diria que eu estudo populismo diretamente, mas indiretamente, no laboratório que eu coordeno, que é o NetLab, a gente lida com essas questões, porque a gente trabalha com a questão da desinformação. E hoje a desinformação está amplamente conectada com a questão do populismo, porque a desinformação virou uma estratégia desses populistas contemporâneos que chamamos de iliberais, né? Para usar um termo assim, uma tradução que não é muito perfeita para o português, mas que nós chamamos de populistas iliberais, que têm características próprias, bem específicas do nosso tempo. E o mais interessante é que eles, de fato, compõem um tipo bem específico, interconectado internacionalmente e articulados, e que vem transformando o campo da política e da comunicação. Então, eu não vou me alongar, porque a palestra não é minha, ainda bem. Nós queremos ouvir a professora Maria, então queria agradecer mais uma vez imensamente. Thank you very much to be here with us. It's a pleasure. E acho que o Milton vai fazer algumas traduções, mas com vocês a professora Maria vai começar, mas acho que o Milton ainda vai falar um pouquinho. Ah, não, desculpa. Vou passar para o nosso ilustre diretor, grande diretor. Cristiano vai fazer as honras da casa. E obrigada, Cristiano, por estar aqui conosco também.
Pronto. Bom dia a todas as pessoas. Obrigado, Marie. Você quase me esqueceu, mas tudo bem. Sem problema, como eu gosto de você há muitos anos. Eu sei. Primeiramente, eu gostaria de saudar... Eita, o microfone. Fecha isso aí. Não, fechar só... É em cima ali. Isso, pronto, obrigado. Primeiramente, saudar a professora Marie Bakardjieva pela sua presença aqui conosco, aqui na Escola de Comunicação da UFRJ, e cumprimentar ao professor Milton Campos, né, e a professora Marie Santini, ambos pelo convite e pela importância e o esforço que promover encontros dessa natureza, dessa relevância, a internacionalização dos nossos programas de pós-graduação é um movimento fundamental para o crescimento das nossas pós-graduações, né? E a ECO abriga 4 programas de pós-graduação. e isso, então, me parece fundamental. Então, em nome da Escola de Comunicação, né, em nome de todo o nosso corpo docente, nossos técnicos administrativos, nossos estudantes, né, eu quero parabenizar pela iniciativa e festejar a presença da professora Marie Bakardjieva aqui conosco, compartilhando as suas pesquisas, os seus conhecimentos, né. Eu tenho particular interesse nessa discussão, nessa questão, né. Como disse a Marie, eu também não pesquiso diretamente questões ligadas ao populismo, mas como eu estudo relações entre religião e política, e venho particularmente interessado nos movimentos que que já se desenrolam já há algum tempo com relação às eleições de 2024, né, as eleições para vereadores e para as prefeituras, né, e como é que esse movimento vem se delineando entre os evangélicos, né, eu, particularmente, tenho interesse em torno dessas discussões. Então, para não me alongar demasiadamente, mais uma vez, felicito aqui ao grupo coordenado pelo Milton, Interativa, a Marie, que coordena o NetLab, entendeu, pela iniciativa, e que venham outras. Parabéns.
Bom, pessoal, boa tarde. Milton Campos, professor da Escola de Comunicação e da pós-graduação do Instituto de Psicologia, o ECOS. Eu não vou falar muito, que eu acho que a Marie e o Cristiano já falaram. Eu só vou dizer rapidamente à Maria, a professora Maria, o que eles falaram, que eles me pediram para...
Vira um pouquinho para cá, porque a caixa está ali. Vira um pouquinho para cá.
É duro ser artista, né, gente? Bom, então eu vou traduzir macarronicamente o que o Cristiano falou, que ele me pediu, e a Marie muito rapidamente. Só, Professor Maria, we are very happy to have you here around us. I'm gonna just say some words of what he asked me to translate some words that he told you, that you are very welcome here at this university, that it's very important for the internationalization of the university, of our school, to have professors with an international recognition in their fields of expertise, to have them around us. And so you are very welcome to be with us. These are, in a different way, the words that Marie told to the audience too. She also talked a little bit about the importance of the subject that you are bringing to us, which is the grassroots illiberalism. And these are things that are important to us because of our history, and that her lab has been doing research on that concerning the relationships of the movements with the social media, and how social media is spreading misinformation, fake news, and etc. These are things that also interest my lab, but we are not going to I'm not going to say more. I'm just going to tell the audience a few words about you, and then I pass the word to you, and then I go there to help you with the slides. Então, pessoal, bem-vindos todos e todas. É só para dizer que a professora Marie Bakardjieva é uma pesquisadora que tem um caminho muito brilhante. Ela tem um doutorado em Sociologia pela Universidade de Sofia, na Bulgária, e também tem um doutorado em Comunicação pela Simon Fraser University, no Canadá. Ela é professora titular da Universidade de Calgary, e ela coordena uma cátedra de Comunicação e Mídias. Dito isso, só para a professora, tem publicado livros muito influentes que tem sido, que na verdade, livros pioneiros. Ela foi uma das primeiras pessoas que publicou um livro prevendo o que seria a sociedade com a internet, né? São livros muito importantes que foram reconhecidos internacionalmente pelos principais pesquisadores da área. Ela está sempre circulando nos meios norte-americanos e europeus com relação a essas questões. E ela traz hoje uma palestra muito interessante sobre suas últimas pesquisas. Eu vou passar a palavra para ela. Ela vai falar em inglês. Eu fiz uma tradução Google dos slides. Então, conforme ela for passando os slides, eu vou passando em português. E a gente vai fazer o possível para ver se tudo dá certo. Tá bom? Então, é isso. Professor Bakardjieva, I will go there. And then the microphone is for you.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming, first of all. I understand this is almost holiday time already, and it is not that easy to bring yourself to an academic event, but I am sure that your academic curiosity and commitment to your studies and to your professors have brought you here, for which I'm very grateful. I also want to thank all the professors that just introduced me, Professor Cristiano, Professor Marie, Professor Milton, who have facilitated my visit. I am deeply honored and touched to be here as an international academic and learn from you and share what I have studied with you. Is that okay? Yeah, good. So with that said, I will try not to be too nervous in my presentation and take you through the narrative that I have prepared here for you. Now the microphone is starting. So I'm not exactly sure what Professor Milton told you about me and my career, so I may repeat some of it, but in order to put my work in context, I will need to say that I come from Bulgaria. And you may not know, but in Bulgaria we have a soft spot, a special feeling for Brazil, because one of our compatriots used to be our president for some time. Dilma Rousseff has a Bulgarian father, as you may or may not know. And so in Bulgaria, we almost thought that we are cousins with old Brazil at the time she was president. So I moved from Bulgaria to Canada in the early 90s to start a PhD at the University Simon Fraser, as Milton mentioned. And that was the time when the internet was growing out, coming out of the research labs and out of the engineering communities and communities of computer scientists, and becoming a medium that the mass person, the ordinary person, would be interested in and will use for their own purposes. And it sounds almost unbelievable these days, but then at that stage, the question, why would ordinary people want to connect to the internet and use it, made sense. We didn't know how the internet could be useful to ordinary people. So that was the time when I collected data and did my PhD study on how people, ordinary people, normal people, not professionals, were taking up, adopting, and using the internet in their everyday life. And unexpectedly to me, as a humble PhD student at that time, this turned to be a very important topic because it was timely, it was capturing development that was new and interesting. So I was able to publish a book on my research, on my dissertation, and basically that started my career. So this is just to show that all of you studying whatever you're studying as PhD or master students, you may not know it, but that could be the event or the phenomenon that really captures attention and builds your academic careers from now on. Because in communication studies, especially with those of us who study digital media, we are at the forefront of developments in this area. And as you can see, those developments are very dynamic and something new is coming up all the time. So in the past 10 years, should I say, I have been studying how digital media are employed, taken up, used by social movements and activists, civic activists. So my most recent projects, one based in Bulgaria, in Eastern Europe actually, because it was in collaboration with European colleagues. So we compared digital media used by activists in Bulgaria and Estonia, two former communist East European countries, one very advanced in their technological digital development, the other not so advanced. So that was one big project that I did recently. And another was digital media used by Canadian activists and social movements. So I have been kind of split between Bulgaria and Canada, which are not very similar countries, but that has helped give me the sense of how all of these otherwise global phenomena are embedded in local histories, in national cultures, and in contexts that give them a specific flavor and specific spin. So working between these two very distinct countries, I have come to appreciate how important that is. So that is just to warn you that what I'm going to present today will be mostly based on a study conducted in Bulgaria. And you may ask yourselves, so why would that be relevant to us? Well, we'll wait and see. Maybe you find it relevant, maybe not. But I sometimes think of Bulgaria as this relatively small European country coming out of communism with very interesting historical trajectory as a social and cultural laboratory where developments are small scale and can be studied and grasped in a, I would say, more transparent, more accessible way than large multicultural societies such as Brazil. So I'm coming from this little laboratory of mine called Bulgaria with these ideas about what many of the professors who introduced me mentioned, and I did get that word, populism. Populism and how it transpires, how it evolves in that particular Bulgarian context. And based on what I have studied there, I am making an argument that may sound a bit crazy because it goes against the grain of what is now almost common sense in the academe, that what we see in Bolsonaro or in Donald Trump or in Viktor Orban, that this is populism. And I read some political science literature and I see how they define it and whatnot. But I am taking a step back from this concept. I want to disentangle what goes into it and differentiate between the varieties of what is called populism and actually labels them in a different way. Because to me, populism has become too big and blurry, and we can go to my first slide now, Milton. Too big and blurry label or a concept that sweeps over some very important differences. Somehow I sit there, and as somebody who studied, say, Marxism and materialism and so on, I wonder, what do these movements that have in common, really, that are placed under the label of populism? Bernie Sanders has been called populist. Maduro has been called populist. But so has Donald Trump. And so has Bolsonaro. And you look at that, what do these people have? Oh, they argue that the people should rule, the people should govern. Fine, but isn't that the nature of democracy? And when people start differentiating between left-wing populism and right-wing populism, I don't find that satisfactory, because left-wing ideology is by definition claiming that the ordinary people, the people, should be the main sovereign and they should govern. So why would we call left-wing ideologies populist? They are arguing that people should be supreme, the people should be supreme by definition. Right-wing, on the other hand, cannot be populist, because in its core is the belief that hierarchies are sacred and that they're natural and that they should exist in society no matter what. So how can they be populist? Only in a very kind of rhetorical way. So it's very superficial to call right-wing ideology populist, even when it uses the populist rhetoric or populist framing. So for me, populism is a concept of no difference. I came upon this citation from Hegel, who said that this is a concept of no difference. It paints everything in black. It is like this night in which all cows look black, and eventually the milkman is taken for a cow. You cannot distinguish between entities, between events and what's going on, because you paint everything with the same brush, calling it populism. And when I turn my attention to the right-wing manifestations of what we call populism, what I see and find there when I dig a little bit in their ideology and under the surface is what I want to introduce as this concept of illiberalism. So we can change the slide. So illiberalism was first defined, proposed as a concept by American commentator and political scientist Farid Zakaria, who said that it's characterized by nationalism, religion, social conservatism, state capitalism, and government domination of the media. And here came Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who proudly announced in 2014 that his country is moving toward what he termed illiberal democracy. So he embraced the concept and was proud to be its flag bearer. So he said that it will be a new state built on illiberal and national foundations. And indeed, a lot of what Hungary has become under Viktor Orban's rule has been pretty much the best illustration of illiberalism, of illiberal type of government. So even people like Chas Mudd, who is a Dutch scholar of populism, he's one of the most cited scholars on populism, has more recently, in a 2021 publication, he was the one who announced that populism is the zeitgeist, the main spirit of our current age. He's a political scientist, that's what he's talking about. Even he has now adopted the illiberal concept, and he's recently said that populism is essentially an illiberal democratic response to undemocratic liberalism. But I would add to that that some kind of populism, like this right wing, is the illiberal populism or illiberal ideology that I want to focus on here. So, to me then, it is interesting to see where this illiberalism, or otherwise called right-wing populism, so that we're on the same page with terminology, but I will still push mine, is coming from. And there is a tendency to find the sources of this right-wing illiberal ideology in authoritarian figures. So here comes Trump and pushes this, and or Orban creates an illiberal state or pursues illiberal policies and tries to establish, popularize illiberal ideologies. So the idea is that it comes from above, that there are these powerful figures who push it on the otherwise innocent people, masses. My question, though, is why do the masses, why do ordinary people buy into it? Why do they fall for it? And so I start looking into another source of illiberal feeling and action and politics, and that source to me comes from the grassroots. So the grassroots, well, maybe I should go to the grassroots slide now, Milton.
The next slide.
Let me see. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't see it here, but yeah, okay. Go now to the next, please. So I would like to tell you what I consider to be the grassroots, or this other source of illiberalism, which is not the top down. I believe that illiberalism is also coming from the bottom up, which means ordinary people, otherwise called the grassroots in progressive politics and civil society literature, that talks about civil society as something different from political institution, politics, parties, and political leaders. The grassroots are these spontaneous, freely formed groups and movements that we typically in liberal democratic theory have been seen as progressive and as strengthening democracy, especially with their participation in policy making, as voters and so on, and also as people who bring up new ideas to the political stage. They've been seen as expression of popular participation in democracy, and as such as progressive. But my claim is that these grassroots can also be the source of regressive, reactionary ideology and policy. And then the question that is important and central is to figure out why. Where is it coming from? Why is it happening or emerging from the bottom up? And that bottom up dynamic of illiberalism is what interests me. And that's where I start looking for its sources and consequences. So you can put on the next slide, please. I wonder what it is doing. No, that's, no. Don't we have a slide before that? Go back then. That's a bit, okay. So, let me see, I don't see what it is. No, go back. Go back, go back, go back. Go back. We're too far. Iliberalismo. Liberalism? Okay, Iliberalismo. Stay on Iliberalism. Okay, so here is my claim. And you can put that in Portuguese because I will talk about it. So if I don't manage to finish this presentation today, I want to give you my central claim. And I'll try to build on it and convince you that it makes sense. So what I call grassroots illiberalism, that's illiberalism, illiberalist ideology and policy that comes, or politics rather, that comes from the grassroots, from civil society, from ordinary people as individuals and organized group. I believe that it is a logical response to the excesses and extremes of neoliberalism and the erosion of democracy and social welfare that neoliberalism has caused. So it is a response that takes the distortion of liberal ideas and values to be representative of liberalism itself, or liberalist values themselves. So it confuses the perversion, the distorted version of liberalism with what liberalism is supposed to be. And so it reacts against it because it doesn't like it. So instead of, or along with, challenging market extremism, absolutism that is inherent in neoliberal ideology and policy, illiberalism from the grassroots attacks the core principles of liberalism and rejects the institutions of the liberal social order as a whole. So populism kind of obfuscates all this as a label or as a concept, where when you think about what, say, Bolsonaro's movement or Trump's movement are doing, the Tea Party, which was pretty much a grassroots development in the States, or the Brexit movement in Britain, which also had very deep roots in the ordinary society, in ordinary people. That is where they're coming from, if you ask me. They are reacting to the extremes of neoliberalism. And so you must have heard about neoliberalism, you probably studied it, because in media, and I'll talk about, you wonder where are the media in all this, but they will come, I promise. So, neoliberalism now, neoliberalismo, please. In brief, and here I draw on David Harvey and Wendy Brown, two theorists of neoliberalism, critics of neoliberalism, one coming from a Marxist political economy perspective and the other coming from a Foucauldian perspective. One focusing on the economic nature of neoliberalism, or political economic, and the other focusing on power and governance side of neoliberalism. Both very, very important critiques of neoliberalism. So to really reduce it to something very brief and quick, what characterizes neoliberalism? Free market rule as a supreme principle. Privatization of everything, of all industries, of all social care services, limited state intervention. The role of government is defined as one that supports the market and the money making of its main players, financial system, market competition, versus the interests of broader society. The state is expected to be subservient to the market and market players. And governing rationality, that comes from Wendy Brown and based in Foucault, the governing rationality extends economic thinking, economic values to every aspect of society, to education, to healthcare. Universities need to be efficient. They need to make money. Hospitals too. Their humane and cultural role is diminished, and they are seen and run as capitalist enterprises. But neoliberalism also puts its mark on individual identity, where individual responsibility for your own fate is placed as a supreme principle. So don't rely on social service, on social support networks. It is you who is responsible for the good, for the success, but for the failure. So if you are having trouble, if you are failing in your profession or in your life, and it's your problem. It's your fault. I was looking for fault. Thank you, Milton. So that leaves the individual extremely isolated, individualized to the extreme, but also individuals are seen as what Wendy Brown calls homo economicus, and maybe that comes from Foucault as well. So they talk about human capital, and you have to market yourself, right? So individual identity becomes a market value, and that is the extent to which it has any value. So that kind of loneliness, abandonment of the individual to their own devices, as well as looking at the individual as a capital good, as opposed to human being and personality. And with all this, with these policies, and you can put now the next slide, the redistributive effects and increasing social inequality. Here I'm quoting David Harvey's Brief History of Neoliberalism. With all this, one key major effect is the redistributive effects and decreasing social inequality have in fact been such a persistent feature of neoliberalization as to be regarded as structural to the whole project. So keyword here, increasing social inequality, increasing split divide between the richest and those at the bottom of the economic ladder. And when you think about the Occupy Wall Street slogan, we are the 1%, we're the 99%. That is a kind of realization of what's going on, that there is an increasing split between the wealth on the top and the impoverishment at the bottom of society. And that bottom of society is actually not a bottom at all, because when you look at economic indicators, about 50% of the population of the world are in this bottom. And here I could not but notice, you can move to the graphs, a parallel development between two things. A graph taken from David Harvey that shows what he calls the restoration of class power. This graph shows, and of course you cannot read it and it's very blurry here, it shows how the share in national income of the top 1% of the population in the US, Britain, and France, maybe there was another country as well, no, US, Britain, and France, has grown. And notice where it all starts. It starts, like the curve starts going up in the early 80s. Early 80s is when it shoots up. That's when the class power of those on the economic top all of a sudden surges. It increases abruptly. And another graph taken from Cass Mudd, that theorist of populism. And we stay with his terminology here, populism. What does it show? It shows the average electoral support for European populist parties by decade. And do you notice where this popular support starts growing? It starts exactly at that breaking point where neoliberalism as a policy championed in Europe, in the US by Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, as well as others, surges. So it is suggesting to me that these are related developments, that with the growth of class power and social inequality, what grows also is discontent that takes this populism form, but within it I kind of reveal and unearth a strong illiberal ideology, illiberal current. And you ask yourself, how are they related? And what is the relationship? And my answer is that growing social inequality and impoverishment is experienced by these people at the grassroots, and their response is illiberalism, which becomes then the zeitgeist, as Cass Mudd argues. And here I have a couple of more graphs that I looked for and found in different economic publications. This one is interesting to illustrate how inequality has been changing. So you can see how in the 80s, there is a start that the blue curve shows you how within country inequality globally goes up abruptly, and how between country inequality goes down, which comes to show that globalization kind of distributes between countries, among world countries, the capital and wealth. So China is growing, and I suppose Indonesia and some countries outside of the capitalist global West, the rich countries of the global West. So there is comes with globalization and outsourcing of production and so on. But with that also comes increasing inequality within countries. And so I have a couple more graphs that speak to that, but I will, and here is another more recent graph of what is happening with populist parties in the growth of support to them over decades. And do you see the decade in which the abrupt growth of support for populist parties in national elections happens? It happens exactly at the time when neoliberalism kind of explodes and becomes the dominant policy of the most influential country that actually paved the way for the rest of the world to jump on that path. So now you can go to from socialism to neoliberal capitalism, because I want to say a few words about post-communist countries in Eastern Europe. Talking about local developments and how these global trends are reflected locally, what happened in post-communist Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the influx of capitalist enterprise, and basically the transition from socialist economies to capitalist economies, was this very abrupt, rapid transition. One day you have public property over the means of production, that means over factories, and a week from now, all this has to be privatized. Why does it need to be privatized? Well, because there is a pressure exerted by the International Monetary Fund, by the World Bank. These countries are bankrupt, and in order to survive, they have to play the game. Remember Greece and how it was pressured to introduce austerity measures. The Greece example is a different one, but it's well known. However, there is a big parallel between what former socialist countries went through and what Greece went through. That was the pressure to privatize and to allow capitalist investment to flow in, and capitalism basically to abruptly take the place of the pre-existing socialist economy. So privatization of previously public property, which resulted in closing of industry, loss of employment. That's when the oligarchs were born. In Russia, of course, it's very well known and discussed, but in all former communist countries, some groups of those who had either through bandit privatization, that we call it, or through different connections and networks of influence, who were able to seize, to grab what used to be public property via politics or via other means, indeed gangster means very often. They rose on top, and here we had the new liberal development happening over the course of a couple of years, when the masses of the population kind of sink in their economic well-being. They lose their social welfare, they lose the social support networks that were characteristic of the socialist state, free education, free healthcare, and pensions and all that, maternity and whatnot. And they are now exposed to this very brutal rule of the market, because the advisors that the US and the kind of International Monetary Fund, international economic elites send to chart the way for the development of these economies were all disciples of the economic school of neoliberalism. So austerity measures, and I have lived through part of this, and I can tell you, it's not fun. However, within this dynamic, winners and losers are created. And I suppose that's very obvious and happened within a number of a few years in Eastern Europe, but it is going on in other societies as well, because that's what neoliberalism does. It creates winners and losers. However, in Eastern Europe, democracy and the ideas of liberalism came in one package, intertwined with these developments. So nowadays, people in my native country, Bulgaria, they cannot disentangle the ideas of democracy and, say, liberal pluralism or individual freedom, which are humanist and progressive ideas, and always have been, from those new liberal excesses or extremes. So think about mixing up Islamic extremism and the Muslim faith. It is something like that, where people do not distinguish any longer between these extreme, brutal results of the new liberalist market imposition from the principles and ideas of democracy and liberalism as such. And where does that put the ordinary person, the mass person, the ordinary citizen? In a very confused and difficult place. So that is not the full story, of course. There were winners, like people like me. I'm one of the winners of these developments, I admit. Why? Because as the Berlin Wall went down, I was able to travel. I was able to leave the small pond that is Bulgarian academe. I was able to go to a country like Canada, get more education, become a professor there. I could, benefit from the new freedoms, intellectual freedoms of expression, freedoms of speech, and so on. So I'm not the one to complain the most, right? But the people who stayed there and who lost their jobs and could not feed their children for years, they do not like liberalism. They do not like market capitalism. They don't like democracy, for goodness sake, or they are suspicious about it. Why? Because it all came in one nod, in one package, with this impoverishment and crushing of their individual well-being or family well-being. Okay. So, yeah, here is my slide about the grassroots. It follows after this, which is a little bit out of place. But, yeah, I want once again to reiterate what I consider to be the grassroots. That is the broad participation of citizens in the democratic process that strengthens liberal democracy in principle, social movements, NGOs, so on. However, already in the late 90s, research on Eastern European NGOs and developments showed that among the civil or those progressive NGOs and social movements, there were the uncivil ones showing up. And those were nationalists, they were causing trouble, they were anti-democratic, they were religiously motivated, they were anti-gay and racism and so on. They were racist in the peculiar Eastern European way that I will mention in a bit. Because Eastern European societies are very homogeneous. Like here in Brazil, you have this huge range of different races, cultures, popular traditions that have come to live with one another, and you don't know how lucky you are. Because in Eastern Europe, it's quite monolith. It is this society that doesn't entertain much variety, is not so open to outsiders, and that quality is very easy to exploit and to capitalize on by anti-liberal, illiberal ideologies. So now I have conducted this study that, because I've been talking for a long time, I'll really run through as fast as I can, and I know that I shouldn't speak very fast, but you'll get the idea. So I have conducted this study, which started out in 2016 when I was working on that project that compared civil society's use of digital media in Bulgaria and Estonia. In that study, we said, okay, we're not going to look only at those liberal, progressive, the ones that we like, NGOs and social movements. We will also try to learn something about what are called the uncivil, or the ones that are espousing populist or illiberal right-wing ideas. And so we managed to make our way into some groups like that and interview some of their leaders. The questions that we were asking were, what lived experiences, powerful mythologies, and raw emotions do uncivil and illiberal citizen groups tap into? And in what ways do they use digital media to capture attention and support? And is the digital media environment conducive to their influence? So now we're starting to ask about the connection between illiberal groups and media. And so the study looked at 3 organizations which espoused illiberal ideology as we defined it at the moment, and that moment in 2016 was related to the influx of Syrian refugees into Europe. And that's when we saw a lot of European societies presenting groups that organized to try and prevent the arrival of these refugees, sometimes in very militant ways. So we took that as a defining characteristic for the moment of illiberalism. So you're not open to suffering people to come and ready to help them and holding these ideas of pluralism and international solidarity, but rather trying to protect your own turf, being afraid of strangers, and not wanting to share whatever well-being you had with these people. So we took that and we looked at what organizations are taking this position, anti-refugee acceptance. And so what we ended up with, and we looked for some diversity in these organizations. So we looked at a sports club, the club of fans of one of the biggest Bulgarian soccer or football teams. People who are organizing protests against the acceptance of refugees. We looked at a patriotic, so-called, self-titled, patriotic paramilitary organization. That organization was preparing and sending paramilitary groups to guard the border between Bulgaria and Turkey, because that was the border that those illegal refugees were crossing to come. And they would capture them, and they sometimes will beat them up, or they will, you know, push them back. They were taking power and violence in their own hands, circumscribing, going around the state, the army, the police, acting as a kind of lynch mob of sorts, although not exactly lynching, it wasn't fair to say that. But they were training in military attire, waging weapons, carrying banners, and considering themselves the guardians of the country, of the territory, of the nation. So the third one was a movement that started out as a movement, but eventually grew into a political party because it became so influential. And those people, they were also anti-refugees, but they also were espousing ideas that were typical illiberal textbook, where there was nationalism, what is called nativism, that their main concern was that the nation is dying because demographically Bulgarian population is declining. So they were calling for measures to save the nation at the expense of being open to the world and at the expense of any international really solidarity. They are anti-European, anti-Atlantic, and Bulgarian liberal governments that have taken this pro-Atlantic, pro-EU orientation and, of course, membership in the European Union. So, selecting these groups then, we decided to look at their ideology through how they express their key concerns and demands on their websites and in public space. One, interview their leaders, and interestingly, some of these leaders did allow us, and that was very tricky interviewing process because it's not straightforward and easy to interview people whose ideas you don't necessarily agree with. You have to really walk on glass and try not to alienate them and not to shut them off with any comment. So you just sit and listen, and they rant and rant and rant, and you just ask some very innocent questions in order not to stop the process of sharing on their part by showing that you're actually not on their side. So it was something interesting that I had not experienced before. So through these interviews and what is called frame analysis of the declarations they have on their websites and in social media, we looked at how they were framing their concerns and their demands. So using the notion of framing, which I suppose, as journalism, or rather as communication students, some of you would know. Is the audience familiar with the concept of framing? Hands up? Yes? No? No? Okay, so this is something to look up. It's a theory or model that looks at how journalists represent reality through certain frames by highlighting certain aspects of what's going on at the expense of others. But in social movement studies, which is the theoretical literature that we grounded our research in, framing is also a very big concept, because social movement theorists believe social movements frame social issues. And there are three different frames that they construct. So one is the diagnostic framing. And the diagnostic framing is about what is the problem, what's wrong, like what is the problem. And so they define what the problem. And then there is prognostic framing. So how can that be fixed? So they come up with ideas about how that can be fixed. And finally, there is motivational framing. So that is, why is it important? How should we do it? And that also contains a big affective component. It's not right, it's offensive, we feel emotionally about the unfairness about of something, and so on. And there is also framing of collective identity. Who is we? How do we define our collective? So we took this analytical grid or framework, and we applied it to the statements and discourses and rhetoric that these movements were putting out in public. So what we found is, I mean, we can go to the next.
Yeah, I don't know what the next.
Okay, maybe we are, all right, go, no, I don't go back and forth, but, okay, so this is the one I want to be at, yeah. Yeah, so here are the three, and I'll go quickly through them because they're not familiar to you, but what I want to emphasize is the three different forms in which illiberalism is manifested in the ideologies and performances of these groups. So the football fans, and I know you have very strong football fan movement here in Brazil, and it could be problematic at times in an illiberal way. In Bulgaria, these people have a very strong community, and how is that community held together? Well, through an online forum. And on this online forum, our informant, the one person from this movement that we interviewed, they found this brotherhood that helps them feel supported, that helps them overcome this isolating feeling of abandonment and of the individual under neoliberal conditions. So they're looking for this affective bond with a community of brothers, but, which is, I mean, yeah, what's wrong with that? It's good. Let them enjoy themselves as a brotherhood and build that through their through their forum, where this informant was saying, you can find help with anything, how to fix your car, where to find the doctor, how to treat your dog, or people will help you. They will vote in competitions for your cat. And we ask, even if the cat is not so pretty, and he says, well, of course, that's what the community is for, right? The cat doesn't need to be pretty, just the solidarity between our members. So they serve this bonding, emotional bonding and mutual support feeling that people lack under neoliberalism. And yet they are macho chauvinists. They beat up Roma people or Ciganos, yes. And that's the Bulgarian racism, because that's the difference, or it's very slightly racially different, but yet culturally they're different, so we don't want them. They are our main problem of our society, right, according to some of these people. So they beat them up at soccer games. They insult, they throw insults at players of color when they play on the soccer field. So they are illiberal in all these senses, and yet they find this community solidarity and mutual support in. So we call that, label that as banal illiberalism. It's banal because it has these everyday manifestations, and it is held together by just interpersonal and group interaction in digital media. So you can go to the next slide. We say that the normalized, this kind of illiberal attitude, it normalizes illiberalism. It's something that's common sense. Think about Gramsci, right? And how with these small everyday beliefs and gestures and acts, something is considered, expressed, consolidated as common sense. Yes, of course, gypsies are lazy. Yes, of course, Bulgaria should protect its borders from foreigners. And so it becomes banal and in that way commonsensical and normalized. So let's go to Shipka now. Shipka are the paramilitary. The paramilitary who are much more militant, much more upbeat. They frame the issues of society as very extreme, as being that the Bulgaria is being ruled by criminals, by people who have stolen state property, who have stolen from the rest of society, and the way to fix that is to basically kill them off or just throw them in jail, sue them, okay, let's say, and throw them all in jail. And in their rhetoric, you can hear a resonance of what Trump has been saying, of what Bolsonaro has been saying, that these liberal elites, they are the problem of society, and they should be violently removed from power and shut off somewhere and not allowed. We, the people, should rule. And who is we, the people? Well, you know, they say the people who are not rich, the people who haven't benefited from the bandit privatization, who haven't benefited from this transition to capitalist economy, which actually gave a lot of wealth and power in the hands of a few, the oligarchs and the political class. So though that is militant illiberalism, it uses this rhetoric, it spreads these ideas. And these people, because they were kind of older, their social base were mainly former military officers, former police officers, people who had been in the kind of law and order organizations of the socialist state, who are very disappointed, disenchanted with what they saw happening, and also impoverished because they held this quite important social position under the socialist state, but nowadays they are pensioners with low pensions and barely putting food on the table. However, they have their professional networks from that former time. They had a website where they would proselytize and spread these ideas from, but it was quite basic, and their Facebook group was quite basic and not very well organized. And the guy who we interviewed, their leader, their spokesperson, was complaining that neither mainstream media nor social media work well for them, because social media arrives too late for them. They don't have the skills. They don't know how to best use them. And the liberal media are against them. So then the third organization is interesting. Let's go to Revival. Now, this organization, which started out as a movement, grew into a political party, established itself as a political party, first around 2017, and participated in parliamentary elections when they won 1% of the vote. In 2023, our latest parliamentary elections, they won 14% of the vote. They have quite a significant group represented in the parliament, and they are not exactly holding the balance of power, but they are blocking the rest of the parties from forming a coalition because there is not enough votes. They take a lot, and they don't want to collaborate with any other party because those are liberal elites and they're evil. And they just stand there and create a mess in the parliamentary system and in governance in the country, with which, of course, they undermine that parliamentary system and liberal democracy, so-called governance, and disrepute it even more, make it suffer loss of reputation and loss of faith in the population. And not surprisingly, in fact, they have been anti-EU, anti-European Union, anti-NATO and all that, because they say we're being enslaved in a new way, we're losing our independence by our memberships in these organizations. And not surprisingly, they went out in force to support Russia in its pretense and its war against Ukraine. So that organization demonstrated that the potential of these grassroots dynamics to really shoot to the stage of political power and change the dynamic of the political system, change how a country is being governed, although it's not there yet, but it is certainly rising in popularity with the chaos that it itself, so it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, the chaos that it is causing in the liberal democratic system. So where does that leave us with regard to the social media? Let's go to the social media. I already spoke about how the particular conditions of Eastern Europe, social media, no, the next one, and grassroots illiberalism. So what happens with social media? With social media, we observe oh yeah, and I should have said that this organization that grew in power and influence the most and captured a lot of vote in the parliamentary elections, they used social media very, very skillfully. They had supporters who were computer professionals, public relations professionals, and they managed to make the best of social media. How? By using it in closed groups to organize internally, and also by amplifying their voice, their influence, by sharing and raising the visibility of their ideas through the public relations tricks that are characteristic of the current social media world and the professional operation in it. So social media were pretty key, and they were complaining that the liberal mainstream media are putting them under a cover and do not give them visibility, but social media are a huge tool in their hands. So what do social media then have to give to such grassroots illiberalist movements? So generally speaking, and going to Gramsci again, they allow the construction of a material apparatus of what Gramsci has called trenches and fortifications, in which illiberal counter-hegemony can entrench itself. They create a material basis for the visibility, the existence, the constant expression and manifestation of these illiberal values and ideas and their claims. Social media have this quality of purportedly democratic expression, so vox populi, or the voice of the people, because everybody can speak, emphasizing the grassroots nature of these ideas, that they come from the people. And yet there is something paradoxical going on. Like with the extremes of liberalism, social media, with the extreme liberty of expression and uncontrolled nature of that expression, no regulation, no anything, allowed us to think about Elon Musk and how he completely denies any ideas of regulation on X, no matter how inhumane or problematic the expression of ideas is there. So with those extremes, social media that look like the ultimate liberal tool go full circle back and help to entrench and establish and rise in influence of illiberalism. It's paradox, but we can see it every day, right? So another thing that social media are very good at is this affective enhancement of feelings, of ideas, of beliefs. And affective, in this case, means based on emotion, based on what I feel, and how these emotions and effects are shared within a community of like-minded people. That's fine, nothing wrong with that. But you know what we're losing in that process? We're losing a typical and characteristic instrument of liberal democracy, which is deliberation, which is what Habermas, major theoretician of communication and democracy, has called the public sphere. And you must have heard about the public sphere idea, right? Public sphere, which is this space of public debate, which is open, equitable for everyone, where different ideas come to meet, sometimes clash, and where the best argument, the best supported argument wins. But does that happen in social media? What do you think? People close themselves in these like-minded communities, filter bubbles, and they don't want to go out and debate and deliberate with others who have different ideas. And for pluralist democracy, for liberal democracy, truly liberal democracy, which is pluralist, that's murderous, because people sink further and further in this exclusive belief or ideology or view of the social and political world that like-minded people reinforce affectively, but they do not respect and do not want to meet the opposite view and to try to negotiate something on rational basis based on science, on evidence. And we saw that in the anti-vaxxer movements, where no rationality, no science, no opposite opinion was tolerated. We just believe this is killing us, vaccines are going to kill us off, and that's it. And my friend and my neighbor and this guy that I met on Facebook believe that too, so it must be true. So the criterion of truth and what is accepted as truth on social media changes profoundly from the liberal public sphere doctrine. Now it's based on how many people believe in that too, and evidence and consideration of different opinions and different views and evidence coming from different directions are not respected and tolerated anymore. And another thing that's happening there, and you've heard Manuel Castells and other scholars who have talked about, Barry Wellman talked about networked individualism that social media and internet kind of supports and facilitates. That has led to these privatized, semi-public, I call them para-public spheres and communities, which do not communicate openly and freely, and a lot of what I said already with the neighboring and remaining different opinions and communities of different belief or conviction. Note another thing, authoritarian leaders. Social media have established these celebrity-making mechanisms that would make somebody a celebrity in fashion or celebrity in popular music, along the same mechanisms, and sometimes through very similar means, authoritarian rulers such as Bolsonaro, Trump, and Orban, and others gain influence. And so social media support this charisma-based or personality-based affective authority, which authoritarian leaders look for and easily achieve via social media. And finally, we find that with social media, there is, because all these groups are active on social media and creating those fortifications and trenches in which they support their own ideology, there is the possibility for them to become aware of one another and to amplify each other's message. And so potential networking and cooperation on certain issues and in fights against liberal ideas and liberal policies are facilitated by this mutual awareness that social media allow. And so, unfortunately, as somebody who has come from a place in the early 2000s when we media scholars looking at digital media then believed that we now have the perfect tool for democracy and for expression of unrepresented opinions and giving more different interests visibility, democratizing public social communication. And now we'll look around and that's what we see. These digital media under, of course, this corporate wrap and business model that has been established with social media. This is what they're doing. They are becoming the perfect tools at the hands of illiberal movements and become very, in fact, influential and infectious. So, yeah, I had a couple of things to say about public sphere, but they're very much around, along the lines of what I already said. And so, what is then the future trajectory that we can expect in a country like Bulgaria, but living in Canada and looking at what is going on in Canada, I can tell you that all these things can be spotted across the Canadian civic, social, political landscape, and you all may have heard about the truckers' blockade of the capital of Canada, downtown Ottawa, that happened in the winter of 2022, and that shocked everyone because Canadians don't do that. They're not so assertive, they're not violent, they're not organizing in such unruly movements and performances, but hey, they did, and that revealed a depth of illiberal sentiment in Canada, of all countries. But we had signs of this earlier in the Yellow Vest movement that mobilized against immigrants and some other liberal policies of Trudeau government. And what we expect to happen in Canada in our next election is the triumph and victory of a unashamedly, overtly illiberal political party, which are the Conservative Party of Canada, that as a party evolved from a more balanced and middle of the way kind of center-right party into this right-wing, almost extreme political organization. Of course, there is a traditional media capture that goes along the way, but I'm not going to go into it. And say in Orban's Hungary, Orban controls the public broadcasting media, the main newspapers. His cronies own and control the mainstream media in Hungary. In countries where the mainstream media are not necessarily directly controlled by illiberal politicians or interests, very often they just react and parrot what goes on in social media because of the belief that, oh, that's where the population is. And I call that the Trump effect. Maybe somebody else called it the Trump effect. Trump was, with his sensationally outrageous claims, and provoked mainstream media to write about him, and in this way to popularize his message uncritically. So there is a phenomenon of traditional media capture in one form or another by this illiberal. And what I anticipate, unfortunately, is a political consolidation, because these different forms of illiberalism that we characterized in Bulgaria, you see, they offer a full buffet of illiberal views and practices to people who are disenchanted because of impoverishment and because of disappointment in democracy and so on. So you can be illiberal in a banal way, you can be liberal in a militant way, or you can be illiberal in this more kind of politically aware and ambitious way, but it all comes down to this change of culture from liberal values to illiberal values, and when these trends consolidate politically, you know what the outcome is? Could be fascism. And so I am sincerely and deeply concerned that Europe, and not only Europe, are moving in that direction. And how far that could go, nobody knows and nobody can predict, and hopefully it does not happen. But there is certainly a huge risk from what we're seeing, doing this marriage of disappointment in neoliberal policies and the damage that they have done on populations, so that the grassroots are now ripe and ready for illiberalism and even constructing it and doing it themselves, and the media that are tools in the hands of this kind of movements that facilitate its rise and dominance. And if you ask me if I see a solution, I really don't, but I put some effort into coming up with some suggestions. And what I would say, and I know it's wishful thinking, and I don't know exactly how it can be implemented, but I believe that the solution could be sought and found, possibly through different means, in a disentanglement of the humanist liberal values, the values of human liberty and humanism and pluralism, from the values of this extreme marketized, commodified, neoliberal capitalism, and say, wait a minute, these are two different things. You do not need to throw out the liberal baby with the neoliberal bath water. Get rid of the neoliberal bath water, restore some regulation, restore some social welfare, restore, housing for young people, or care of the state for demographic growth, for young families, for mothers, for children, daycare, accessibility, and do these things which are anti-neoliberal, right? But don't get rid of the liberal value of human freedom, privacy, justice, equality before the law, and all these things that, in fact, the Enlightenment and progressive politics have been standing for centuries for now. So it's taking away too much from us if we say, oh no, we don't want your liberalism, and embrace these illiberal values and illiberal policies, because the consequences will hit us, the ordinary people, in the first place. And so how do we get that? Well, I am thinking about a new concept that has to be somehow developed and elaborated, of communicative responsibility. Communicative responsibility by audience members that are not sheer consumers, that are not sheer likers and affective supporters of things that sound right, but critical audiencing or critical reception of news, of ideas that come to us via the media. And civic responsibility and communicative responsibility in the sense of what do we accept, what do we share, how do we participate in the world of social media that give us access, and how can that be achieved? Well, I guess through civic education and building these capacities for critical reception and communicative responsibility in students, in young generations, and that's where our academic responsibility as communication scholars and teachers lie, because these are the students that we can only hope to go out in the world and teach people to these alternative ways of handling both traditional and social media. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I know it was a very long talk.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you warmly for your thoughtful and very inspiring talk. You are proposing so many future ways for us to think about social media and politics, and I thank you very much for your talk. I think everybody will be able to watch it again, or to tell other people to see that on YouTube. But prior to ending this very nice encounter that we are having here, I'd like to open the words for those who want to ask something to Maria, and you can go, if you want to ask a question, you can go to the microphone over there. And is there someone who would like to do something? Okay, but on the microphone, please.
Thank you for the thoughtful sharing that you had today. Should I raise my voice? I think it's on. It's on.
Closer.
Okay, yeah, speak up.
Yeah, it's better.
Closer, thank you.
Yeah.
I was thinking that you're going to give us a conclusion, a solution on the, because I was waiting for a solution to, when you spoke about neoliberalism and you spoke about winners and losers and the creation of winners and losers, and you took us to the last point on your conclusions, when you said you had no solution, I kind of went far. I thought that maybe the new rising illiberalism and the fascism will lead us into kind of a third world war.
Into what?
Third world war. It can be one of the extremes we have, because if we look at, I went to Argentina to look for Milei's attitude, and looking at Trump's and also Bolsonaro, and also going back to Bulgaria when you spoke about the group that the militant who are against, who train like the paramilitary. Here in Brazil, I can be called as militia.
There are militias.
Yes, there are militias. I kind of compare them with the militia, because their role is that they think they will defend the country, meanwhile that being extreme is of some sort. What will be the real outcome, actually, of fascism, looking back to the history, looking at Hitler and looking at other politicians who passed and have done a lot of atrocities because of leading things into extreme? It seems like we're going back instead of moving forward into a second world Cold War and a second nuclear world war that is basically being raised. If we look at the current political situation in the world, it kind of leads us to that. Everybody is showing their superpower, where Russia has got, you mentioned some groups which are pro-Russia, indirectly, but it showed that. And he also mentioned some, like the Democrats, and are kind of being fought back by the right wing. Because we speak about the right wing as people who are not Democrat, and left wing as people who are Democrat. If I come back to Brazil, it's like, that's what we have. So what will be the really outcome of all these turbulence circumstances that we're going through right now? Thank you.
So basically you're asking about the international consequences of this, of geopolitical, if you would like. Well, I am not an expert in that. I'm not an expert in political science, although I felt that I had to dabble in political science and its definitions in order to see through this veil that some of the concepts like populism are drawing over the diversity, the variety of things that are happening. So we see some of that, what you're afraid of or worried about already, because neoliberalism globalizes and exploits remote regions of the world, and up to the point where they comply and where they play the role that is assigned to them. But the moment they don't, like Iraq or Libya or Syria, it's ruthless. it's going at them, and military conflict is justified by some liberal ideas. Oh, we want to establish liberal democracy in the Middle East. How? Well, through violence, through force, right? And these things are connected. They are connected. They come from the same extreme subservience to political leadership, political elites, to these neoliberal economic interests. That's my interpretation. But I am not really a political scientist and anybody expert in international politics, but I do have my concerns that think about where does the migrant wave and where does the fascistization or illiberalization of European populations come from? Well, to a large extent, it's triggered by these refugee waves that are coming as a result of imperialist wars that are being waged. And it's all interconnected, because again, the extreme arrogance of illiberal politics and economics is creating these military conflicts that are producing destroying the well-being of people in countries which previously led pretty decent lives, and are sending them as ways of refugees in other regions of the world, which kind of stand up to defend their turf and their native rights and well-being, and because they're scared. And it goes this circle, which is initiated by, again, the extremes of neoliberalism. So is that going to grow into a third world war? Who is to say? I cannot say, but we don't want it to, right? And that's why when I see people going out to demonstrate against wars and against violence, like now it is happening in Gaza, I think there is hope, because these protesters, these people that come together in different cities in the world and raise their voice and protest en masse against military violence, I hope they hold some power and some influence, and they're probably our only hope.
Thank you. Another question to Maria. Marie, please. You should be here, right?
Turn it on.
Hello?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your brilliant presentation. I'll try to ask in English, but I don't know if I can. I'll try. Maybe Milton can help me. Sorry, I'm tall. Very interesting what you said about illiberalism, because in Brazil, in Latin America, we have a situation that liberalism and illiberalism here, it's not so coherent as in Europe and USA. For example, the movement that we are seeing in Brazil with Bolsonaro, bottom up, this movement bottom up, people in talking about the moral values, they are really conservative and calling for traditional values and connected with religion, but in their economic view are very connected and naturalize capitalism. So when you say that this comes from dissatisfaction from these people with the capitalism, what we are seeing in Brazil is something very strange, because they don't question capitalism, they question democracy. And what we are seeing here is in some way the divorce from democracy, with democracy and capitalism. They were together after the Second War because of the communism and capitalism. They were in different places. But what we see now is that it's true that it's based on the insatisfaction of people with capitalism, but capitalism are naturalized in some way that what we question is only the moral values and in the state, but not the capitalism anymore. So communism now is something like taboo. I don't know how to say.
Yeah, it's taboo.
Taboo? Okay. It's like a taboo, something that comes from monsters, and they are really authoritarian. But what is in question here, except in Brazil and Latin America, it's the meaning of democracy, not the meaning of capitalism. Capitalism, everybody's accepting, and then equalities and everything, but in some way we have not liberalism and illiberalism because it's different, but we have the left, let's say, that try to connect the idea of a state that are present in the everyday life with public schools, public universities, helping people with, how can you say, como se fala renda mínima? Eu não sei.
Minimum wage?
No, not wage. The amount of money that you get in a year is minimum.
It's a yes, the minimal income. It's a public policy in poor countries like Brazil. So they yes, like living income. So they want a big state, but they are illiberal in the moral sense. Yes. So what's happening here is the dispute of narratives, what democracy is. So Bolsonaro say that democracy is this capitalism without regulation, this market-driven state, but with the militaries, because the militaries guarantee the real democracy, because they put order, and democracy needs order. And in the other way, the left say that, and they say that what the left wants is something that is not democracy because of the corruption. And what left say is that it's impossible to have democracy with militaries. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, because in Latin America we have different realities. The concept of liberal is not, you cannot apply so easily here, because we never had this liberal in the American sense, that they are liberal in moral and market values. Here it's a little bit different. So I would like you to talk about why we are not talking about anymore about the capitalism, only about democracy, values, affection, emotions, but capitalism is there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this question, because it gives me a chance to once again highlight the importance of cultural and national specifics that's based in the history of a particular society, what it has gone through and how it has been conceptualized in its ideas and cultural concepts. And so obviously Brazil and Latin America will be different, and that's why I was talking about the historical experience of the post-communist countries, because their democracy and capitalism came as one package. And in fact, when people they do not complain about capitalism, because neoliberalism has been very good at enculturating people in the belief that capitalism is a given, that there is no other way, that this is just something that we have to accept, and it's not under question. And that's where our energy goes into arguing over social and cultural values and religion and gender and things that are in the culture and ideological sphere and not in the economic. And that's my critique to these illiberal movements and their positions, that instead of questioning capitalism, because they have naturalized that and kind of swallowed and accepted the neoliberal common sense, they're not criticizing that. They suffer from it. They see their well-being reduced and impoverishment and loss of access to healthcare, or loss of access to decent education, and all the consequences of that. But they do not complain and revolt against the neoliberal capitalist policies that have, or austerity, right? They complain and revolt against liberal values because they see it, one as natural order of things and the other as open to questioning. And so that's what my appeal is, to actually dissociate these things and say that democracy is one set of values and it's not necessarily married to these specifically neoliberal extremes of capitalist economics. And we should try to preserve this, the democracy and the liberal aspects of it, whereas the other we should question and criticize and revolt against. So we are not saying different things. You're thinking along the same lines that I am. Because, yeah, because I said it at one point, instead of critiquing the neoliberal extremes of capitalist economic policy and economics, people are turning against the core values of liberalism as such, which is pluralism, minority rights, individual rights, and what they're doing is they're basically making a full turn back to some religious, traditional, nativist, nationalist values because they wrongly believe that it is liberal ideas that are harming them. They do not. Call it false consciousness if you want, but yeah, they are shooting at the wrong target. And that's why it is important for intellectuals, for public intellectuals, to help conceptually separate the values of liberalism, which are values of human freedom and justice and rights, human rights and individual rights, from the harms that neoliberal policy and economics has done under the flag of liberalism. Yeah?
I just wonder, I was thinking here that, in fact, I think the framework everywhere is about the same, but the actors are different. So, and of course the contexts are different. For example, in Eastern Europe, people are afraid of refugees. And here we are not afraid of refugees. So the actors, the illiberal actors, they raise uncomfortableness against our own people, the poor people of the favelas, the communists, the PT. So the and women and black people and LGBTQA+, but there too, Orban just forbade. There's a new law in Hungary against gay people. So I think the framework is the same. What we have to explore to better understand in our country are how these actors work in our cultural historical framework on our own history, and also the history of our neighbors, because we have fascism back in Argentina, and Bolsonaro was received as chief of state, and Lula didn't go. So weird things are happening, and of course we have to look at how we relate to social media. As she said at the beginning, and I was there with her, we believed that that internet would be an opportunity, a transformation of the world, and now what we see is that it became an instrument of techno. I call it a techno slavery. So as a means of techno slavery to colonize interiorly everyone in those things. So I don't have a question because I know Marie and we are always talking. I respect her very much. And I started thinking about this because I talked to her, Iliberalism. I didn't know that before. So is that somebody else who wants to... alguém quer fazer uma pergunta? Patrícia, vai lá. Você não pode ir embora sem uma pergunta.
Thank you, dear professor, for your words for us from Brazil. I appreciate it so much. So my question is about, I always think as an activist of a better future for our society with the rescue of other knowledge. Such as the original people, because they have other forms of knowledge that we don't know about that, such as the African philosophy, for example, as Ubuntu. It means we work with the development of the society with mutual cooperation, or when the social actors are managers of their own society. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know these philosophies. I don't know these philosophies. I have just heard anecdotes about African collective values. I remember this one anecdote that said that some Western researcher was working with a group of African children, and the researcher told them, okay, here is a basket of fruit. You all start from this line, and let's see, whoever reaches the basket first running, they will have the fruit. And then the African children looked at each other, and then they held each other by the hand in a line, in a row, and they all ran together and then shared the basket of fruit. So I've heard an anecdote. I don't know the philosophy, but I love it, right? And so I think, and I sometimes argue with people who say, very much raised in this Western individualist philosophy, and especially that philosophy, that, or rather value system, that is exacerbated by neoliberalism, that the individual should fight for its right in constant competition with everyone, should market themselves, sell themselves on the market, and be responsible for whatever the result is, whether they succeed to become an oligarch or fail to become an impoverished person. So that philosophy that you probably are referring to is the exact counterpoint of this. And it has to do with the collective nature of human being. And when I argue with people who are schooled in this, oh, individual, that's the only way to advance a society, because individual incentive comes from individuals pursuing their individual interests, and that's human nature. And I say, but wait a minute. We know from anthropology that humans have survived and evolved and developed as a species, but also as cultures, and due to collective efforts, that cooperation is actually human nature, that primates live in herds, in groups, and help each other secure food, and that's what we know about the evolution of humans. So why would you say that individualism is human nature? No, collectivism is human nature. But certain developments and certain both economic, materialist, and ideological interests and views have suppressed that and have led us to believe that. So a restoration of this understanding and this view on human nature would be very valuable in a redemption effort vis-a-vis these neoliberalist ideologies that are ruling and that in such a funny way manifested themselves in the anti-vaxxer movement. Because what were anti-vaxxers saying? They are going ahead with the typical neoliberal individualist, my freedom to not wear a mask, to do whatever, to go wherever I want. But how about the freedom of others and the right of others not to get your viruses, right? How about the freedom of sick people or people with compromised health or elderly people to survive that you are threatening by pursuing your freedom not to wear a mask, you know? So that was a ultimate expression of neoliberal approach, and people would not even recognize it. So we have to become clear about these things. And that's my appeal, to disentangle and differentiate what is actual liberalism, what is capitalism that we don't want to necessarily take to a neoliberal extreme. And neoliberalism is a capitalist doctrine. It's a doctrine in capitalism. But because of its name, it's confused with the social values of liberalism and so on. So it's a mess, like it's a conceptual mess, and people are very, very confused. And add to it the different historical experiences and harms that they have suffered, and it becomes very, very difficult to straighten out. But I am with you there, yeah, about African philosophy.
Somebody else? Okay, so come on. Come to the microphone, please.
Well, hi. I try to speak in English.
Sure.
And I'm Leonardo. I'm not studying here, but I have a master's degree in political science.
Oh, good. So you're the expert.
And I was thinking about the illiberalism concept, and I think I don't understand very well if we call illiberalism as anti-liberalism or non-liberalism, and if we cannot call it like anti-liberalism or non-liberalism, what is the main difference? This concept, like anti-liberalism and illiberalism.
Yeah, to my mind, there is no huge difference between anti-liberalism and illiberalism. But whereas anti-liberalism expresses and stands for opposition, I don't accept these values or these principles of social order. Illiberalism is I maintain, assert, support, and in fact establish values that are not liberal, And so it is more of the kind of constructive, positive way to speak about building societies, standing for social reforms or social arrangements that are not liberal, not so much in the negative sense as an opposition to this, but as something different. And in that something different, often there is not necessarily an anti-liberal direct opposition, but just turning back to pre-liberal. You can think about it as post-liberalism, if you would like, although a lot of it is pre-liberal, because it's religion, it's this nativist, organic, believed community, nostalgic of when we were just white people, you know, all sharing the same ethnic roots and that kind of thing, which is pre-liberal. And the pursuit of these kind of alternative to liberalism principles of social order and community are the ones that I understand as the illiberal, right? But note that when Zachariah defined it, he also included state-sponsored capitalism. So indeed, that is going back to certain arrangements that preceded liberal policy, both economically and socially. And that's why I want to work with that term, you see, because it's not the negation, it's the alternative to liberal. But that alternative is often what we had before in traditional societies. But you can argue that it's not the best term and so on, and I've just chosen it.
So last question. Is there anyone willing to? Juliana, please. Vai precisar de tradução?
Anotei aqui, acho que não. Vamos ver se me ajuda. Okay, thank you. Segurando melhor, né? Mais pertinho. Okay. My question is about social media algorithms. That's a very big problem, because it was developed to deliver more and more of what interests each people, and this makes it almost impossible for a common user that don't knew deeply technology to, how can I say, pierce this filter bubble, no? This bubble. So, especially because they return what we want, that is the feeling of cooperation, belonging, and emotions that reinforce what we believe. So, how do you imagine is it possible to take the opposite path, to promote dialogue between different ideas, different groups, if you are, how can I say, deeply within these platforms every day? How can we take the solutions that you appoint?
Yeah. Well, first of all, algorithms are made by people, right? So algorithms, and that's something that I have learned when I was studying and working with ideas from social studies of technology. We tend to give technology this autonomous flair or nature, that this is what algorithms do. But that's not true. Algorithms do what their programmers, and of course the corporate owners who pay those programmers, believe is the best business solution, or the best business model, or kind of affirming and realizing the most profitable business model. So social media are not necessarily doomed to be running this particular type of algorithms. Those algorithms themselves can be challenged and can be changed. They can be regulated, for goodness sake, right? Because it's all a matter of questioning and challenging the power of these corporations to make social interaction and social life what profits them the most, benefits them the most, right? So how is it possible with these algorithms? It will be hard. It will be to say, you have to be a critical user and realize that that's what algorithms push you to do. And you should be seeking ways to pull yourself out of. But can you realistically expect that from the everyday person who doesn't have, one, the understanding, second, the skills, third, the time or the desire to counteract what is coming to them very comfortably, very easily, cozily, and so on. So that's probably unrealistic. But can you, on the other hand, demand that corporations are not allowed to run these algorithms freely and constantly and in every area, so as, for example, to entrench feelings of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or, well, of course we can question these things and make these corporations be transparent with algorithms. How is that possible in a regulatory environment? I suppose media policy people can speak more of. It's not impossible though, but will it happen without mobilization and challenge and push on the part of, again, social movements and organizations that are technically competent and know what to push for? I don't think so, because governments and regulators in many places of the world are in the pocket of these corporations. So it has to come from civil society that is thinking critically and organizing itself against these. Is that easy, and is it realistic, and is it possible to happen tomorrow? No. But it is important, and that's another pedagogical duty that we have, is to teach students that algorithms are not God-given, that they're not necessarily so. They have been made to work this way because corporate owners believe that this is the business model that works best for their profits. Yeah, sorry for maybe a banal answer, but that's the best I can say.
So thank you, Professor Bakardjieva. I'd like to thank you all for coming here. Those who are watching us, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Ribeiro, for enabling this conference, and also my colleague Marie Santini, and my students, her students, our students. So thank you very much from students from the Institute of Psychology who are here. And Maria wants to say something.
Yes, I want to say thank you once again. I started with a thank you, but after I kept you here for an hour and a half to listen to my voice, and you did so patiently, and then had questions, wonderful questions to help me clarify and my own thinking about stuff and see how it looks from a different perspective. You've given me an incredible academic experience. That's the beauty of our work. That's what we live for. To be invited, to meet new people, to be listened to, even if we go into extremes, which I apologize for. So thank you. Thank you for all this. And thank you for welcoming me to Brazil and to your intellectual home.
Thank you, Professor Bakardjieva. You are all invited to go along with us for lunch, if you will. It's the restaurant Coco Bamboo on the other side of the mall, on the other side of... eu estou falando inglês.